Hello and welcome to the Evercore ISI 2020 webinar with David Batt, Kimberlite Research. Speaking today from Evercore ISI will be energy analyst James West. I'd like to remind everyone that the material in this webinar is based upon information considered to be reliable, but neither Evercore ISI nor its affiliates guarantee its completeness or accuracy. Assumptions, opinion, and recommendations contained herein are subject to change without notice. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future performance. Material is not intended as an offer or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security, and we will not be disclosing any non-public information. Our speaker will be taking questions via the questions window on your webinar control panel. Please type your questions in at any time during the presentation. And now I'll turn the microphone over to James West.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, round two with David Batt of Kimberlite Research, who has been an honored guest as part of our virtual energy industry leadership leader series. Thanks for joining us again today. So you may recall our insightful event from a month ago where David provided us with an overview of the North American and international onshore markets. And this time around, we're going to take things offshore and focus on the $15 billion plus annual subsea market, leveraging Kimberlite's valuable proprietary data set that's used to conduct competitive analysis for a broad swath of investors, oilfield service companies, and coverage bankers alike. David brings over 30 years of extensive energy and oil and gas experience. He began his career as a geologist with Chevron and later held executive and general management roles with Chevron, where he led the creation of Chevron Energy Solutions and served as vice president. In 2003, he departed Chevron to lead Constellation New Energy Texas. Under David's leadership, Constellation became the second largest provider in the emerging Texas deregulated energy market, and he returned to his upstream roots in 2007 and has been involved in leading oilfield research, tracking all facets of the upstream industry, including technologies and supplier performance. David received his BS in geology from the University of Oklahoma, MS geology from Oklahoma State University, and an MBA from the University of New Orleans. Kimberlite International Oilfield Research is an international oil and gas market research and consulting company that uses data collected from one-on-one interviews with professionals to assess current market trends and establish performance benchmarks for oilfield equipment and service suppliers. The company serves as a third party to collect and evaluate feedback from industry professionals, and this offers an unbiased review of the services and technologies E&P companies use in their daily operations. Kimberlite provides anonymity to all participants, allowing them to provide candid feedback on issues most important to them. The company produces reports and analysis on market shares, supplier performance, regional reports, and product line reports and other specialty services that are used by oil and gas companies, oilfield service providers, and of course, investment bankers. So David, thanks for joining me today.
James, glad to be with you.
So maybe before we get into some of the questions I had, are there any opening remarks you'd like to make, or maybe a quick overview of how you conduct your market research?
Sure. I'll go ahead. I know you covered it a little bit in the introduction there, but for those that may be a little bit newer to us, I try to use some of these exhibits here to maybe describe it. At Kimberlite Oilfield Research, we basically each year interview about 3,000 users globally around the world each year. And through these personal one-on-one phone interviews that you talked about, and our research is global, and we do generate a series of reports across drilling, completion, production. Subsea is what we'll be talking about today. And so through these phone interviews, we're able to capture a lot of information about technology trends and supplier performance and future activity and trends. One of the exhibits I'll be sharing today is this little quadrant map where we plot supplier performance on the x-axis versus pricing competitiveness on the y-axis. So this little 2x2 grid you'll see a lot of in our discussions today.
So David, maybe just given that you just published the Subsea report, so you just had a lot of conversations with industry participants, I'd love to hear kind of what the operator sentiment is out there, and how does it compare to maybe prior downturns, and of course if there's any differences between independents and NOCs and the major oil companies.
Sure. We just published the Subsea report earlier this month, James, and in this particular report, we interviewed over about 50 subsea E&P operators globally who in aggregate manage about 4,500 subsea wells. And so we're really able to get a good comprehensive capture as to what the subsea E&P operators are thinking. When we look at their sentiment trend here on this map here, you can see, we came out of the last downturn of 2015-16 where the sentiment was below 50, indicating contraction. And when we got into 2017, you can see that for the subsea operators in the Gulf of Mexico and the subsea operators internationally, how their sentiment indices were climbing above 50 into kind of an expansionary mode. But because of the long-term planning nature, you probably recall, James, that in 2017, U.S. land was getting better.
Sure.
The subsea suppliers were still struggling because they had worked off their pipeline of work from 15 and 16, right? And the E&P operators had to go into their planning session for 18, the plan for 19. And sure enough, when they came out of the planning sessions, they were growing at about 12% a year, 11.7% a year, and that precipitated in a slug of orders that went to FMC and OneSubsea and started to fill up their subsea pipeline for 2019. But look what happened here. I mean, just rapid. You see the Gulf of Mexico, the independent operators in the deep water market reacted very sharply to recent conditions over the last, say, 2.5, 3 months. And they went from an expansion sentiment to a contraction sentiment rather quickly. The international operators, if you go back to the last downturn, they're typically 6-12 months lagging behind the U.S. operators and whatnot. But here, they didn't wait 6 to 12 months themselves either. They've already contracted back, and they're approaching the 50 mark with very little expansionary plans year on year for subsea moving forward. So very sharp, very quick response. Again, though, the independent operators are moving far more quickly than these international operators. These are long cycle projects too, James. I mean, when an E&P operator commissions a project, they're usually fairly committed to it. And once it's begun, they don't pull back. And so they're really having to kind of slow down as best they can anything that's still in the pre-feed stage.
Gotcha. Okay. I think it's interesting and definitely not surprising to see the Gulf drop as quickly as it has. Perhaps could we talk a little bit about the regional nuances, where customers are experiencing some success with the various subsea technologies on a regional basis, maybe the Gulf, North Sea, Africa, Asia Pacific?
Sure. That's a good question. When we conduct these phone interviews, James, we'll ask an open-ended question. It may be as open-ended as what technology, services, or development approaches have had the biggest impact on improving your subsea operations over the past 2 to 3 years. And when we ask something this wide open, they basically will share just about anything that's on the top of their mind that they've been having success with. But we take a look at these verbatim comments, and we have to read through them all, obviously. And then what we find, though, is the topics that they're talking about, James, are largely about improved equipment reliability, be it with trees and control systems and umbilicals and flexibles and connectors, subsea boosting, being able to tie in wells into centralized facilities, intervention, lightweight well intervention technologies. But to your point, when you do break it out by region a little bit, you can see that the international subsea E&P operators, like in Africa and Asia Pac regions, they're really focused on equipment reliability, whereas the Gulf of Mexico operators and the North Sea operators have been really experiencing some success, if you will, through improved monitoring, lightweight well interventions, fiber optics, subsea boosting, and so you do see a split, if you will, between how the international subsea operators have been progressing versus how the Gulf of Mexico and the North Sea operators that tend to be the leaders, if you will, in a lot of this new technology adoption.
Right. That's extremely interesting that they're more on the intervention and monitoring versus the reliability. I guess they're very comfortable with the equipment. Well, how are the operators?
It seems like the more remote you are, like a lot of these areas, they're just trying to keep the bare basics of the equipment working, whereas, and the more, obviously the Gulf of Mexico is the backyard for Houston and the North Sea as well. They seem to be early adopters for new technology deployment.
Right. Well, how are the operator economics changing, and how are the companies talking about driving down the cost curve?
Sure, sure. The we asked in the 2018 report, what price of oil do you need to justify a subsea development? You can see on this slide here, if it's showing, James. I don't know if you can see it or not, but
I can see it.
uh, you know, in the 2018 subsea survey we did, they need about $57 a barrel, which is a pretty high price. And here in the 2020 report, that's been driven down to 51.91, say $52 a barrel. Tiebacks are at about $42 a barrel. But it's not exactly even. I mean, if you look at the tieback price, you've got 26, 34, what is that? About 60% or so of the subsea operators that we interviewed said that they can make a tieback work at $40 or less, right?
Right.
But you do see this wide swath here. And so the costs do seem to be driving down. I think what some of this is driving it is on this next graph here, you can see about 2/3 of the investments are around brownfield operations, being brownfield production enhancements or brownfield expansions, trying to leverage existing assets as best as possible.
Got it. So we've seen delays, and a couple projects I think have been outright canceled. Where do you think they're going to be driving, or where does the value come from and drives these projects to start back up? And obviously, one of those is usually the faster schedule changes when project timelines are extended. So where do we see kind of subsea providers adding value, and kind of as we come out of this downturn, getting projects back, getting greenlighted?
Sure, sure. We're going to have to continue to drive this cost curve down, I guess, picking back up on your earlier question. And when we do some of this research, many of the subsea suppliers, be it FMC or OneSubsea or Baker Hughes or Aker and such, we'll ask questions in our surveys. And here's one here that says, do you, the E&P operator, do you see any value in having early engagement with your subsea suppliers, for FEED, pre-FEED, concept evaluation, and even supplier-led solutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that the E&P operators, they believe that they do engage early with their subsea suppliers, that the majority of them will see some value in faster schedules, delivery times, lower project cost. They're not fully subscribing to the fact that early engagement is going to drive higher ultimate reservoir recovery, right?
Right.
So
Okay.
clearly, we did a question, last year on the use of supplier-led solutions and reverse economic engineering leading to lower project cost. And I can't tell you how many times we've had situations where an operator will say, we put out our specifications, we put it out to the standard bids came in, they're all too high. We can't make the project work.
Right.
And if having worked at Chevron, the one thing you do want to do is get projects approved, right?
Sure.
So then you got to figure out, how do you make it work? And by partnering up, oftentimes using supplier-led solutions and standardized solutions, I've seen examples where project costs have been cut by an additional 20, 30+%, even as high as 40%. And so I think in order to get some of these projects moving again, we're going to have to see more collaboration. I think a lot of the E&P operators have been, like, if you go to the Gulf of Mexico here, about where they've been seeing some value, mostly they've been getting quick hits on subsea tiebacks and boosting projects, rigless interventions, and going back in very creatively and quickly, trying to keep the cost structure down. I think standardization will continue to play a role in collaboration. You can see here for digital, they haven't quite seen the value in it yet because it's still in its early stages of development.
Right. Okay. So what are some of the technologies subsea operators are planning to make greater use of in the future, and where are they seeing the best financial benefit or best returns?
Sure. That's another question that we typically ask in an open format during our interviews. So like it would look something like this, James, like, when we do the interview over the phone, we'll just ask them, how do you see subsea developments and operations of the future changing from the way that we design and operate today? And again, you can start to see, their key comments that they talk about, more automation and such. But we read through all these verbatims and we try to analyze them. What we find is digitization, automation, AI, and data analytics is really one of the key developments and technologies that they really plan to make greater use of in the future. I also see, all electric systems. We've talked about all electric systems for quite some time, and they seem to be making maybe a resurgence coming back. We talked about real-time remote operations, I think, last time we spoke, and I know you have with other industry professionals how that's going to stick post this downturn, and standardization. So these tend to be, the key technologies and that the subsea E&P operators plan to make greater use of. I had the opportunity last week to participate in a cross-functioning group of major E&P operators, principally the major oil companies, had their digital fiber experts, and they collaborate, and they collaborate with us, and we collaborate back with them. But it was really interesting how they're taking a very long-term view and wanting to really digitize their fields and increase the level of monitoring of both subsea equipment and downhole wellbores. So
right. Well, that's definitely a trend that we're seeing kind of across the board, I think, within the oil field. Where do you think the biggest gap in the market is right now in terms of the subsea offerings? They're robustly supplied versus items or services that need to be advanced further.
Well, I guess I could address that in two ways. I mean, off the top of my mind, certainly faster delivery and delivery times. And, we talked about as the backlog started to fill for the subsea E&P, for the subsea suppliers like the FMCs and the OneSubseas in 2019, delivery times for control systems and trees started to get pushed out to the right.
Right.
But in this 2020 report we just published a couple of weeks ago, we did ask a question about where they'd like to see some improvements in these various systems, and you can see about 45% of the E&P operators were asking for some advancements in subsea tree designs and control systems. And, it really kind of turns out that when it comes to control systems, it's the classic, we'd like to see them be a little bit more reliable, right?
Right, sure.
A lot of these control systems become obsolete, and then you're stuck with, what are you going to do? I mean, there's companies like, obviously, ProServe and such that, can come in and replace the internal guts of it and get them operational again. When it comes to subsea trees and such, though, very commonly they're looking for not only just improved reliability, but smaller, more compact systems. And you're seeing a host of investments there, from FMC's 2.0 to Baker Hughes's Aptera and their modular designs. And so, but they'd like to see advancement here, but clearly delivery times need to be advanced.
Right.
Trying to think, what else did we have here on something I maybe want to share? One thing when we look at the distribution of a typical subsea operator, James, this is interesting. Back in 2016, subsea equipment monitoring and surveillance and downhole well performance monitoring each made up about 3% of their typical budget. And now you can see it's, on a percentage basis, you could say it's almost tripled, but now it's up to 8 to 9%, right? And
right.
So you can definitely see these digital trends that we keep tracking and you keep tracking start to work their way through the budgets into the dollars here.
Right. Well, I do want to get into some of the product lines here, but maybe before that, we've talked in the past and about the alliances, and there's been some pretty big headlines. We've had alliances, we've had M&A. Subsea 7 still has an example of an alliance agreement. What's the value proposition that customers are sharing with you for teaming up and offering with the companies offering these alliances? And maybe could you walk through some of the anticipated benefits and the concerns, from this relatively new practice?
Sure. Back when we did the 2016 report, Technip and FMC were coming together. I think they officially joined around January of 2017 or such.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been tracking it since then. If you go back to the 2016 survey, the 18 survey, and here we are of 2020. What was interesting when we would ask the E&P operators, what impact of alliances between subsea equipment suppliers and vessel contractors, it kind of stayed relatively steady with about a third of the operators, 33%, seeing a positive impact. But it really wasn't until this 2020 report that we saw an uptick that took it beyond this base load right here to about 47, say 50%. Now, there is a minority group down here that started out at 5%, it's grown to 13, now it's up to 20%, saying it's a negative impact because, it decreases the level of customer choice and competition, James. And
right.
And once they have me locked in, they lose their customer focus. But for those that see the positive benefit, the benefits that they do ascribe to and that they're experiencing certainly fall within the value propositions that were envisioned when Subsea 7 and OneSubsea were, coming together, and Technip and FMC were coming together. You can see improved integration, execution efficiency, better resource planning, and better availability and lead times. Well, we ask them to be a little bit more futuristic and say, look, these relationships become more mature in the future. What do you anticipate the benefit to be? You can see that the cost savings that used to be ascribed to by half of the E&P operators is down to like only 1 in 5. So I think they're pretty well, recognize that may not always come to fruition, right?
That's interesting.
But what seems to be sticking here, though, is efficiency and faster implementations and better mobilization times. And time is money, as you know.
Yep.
One of the things that the E&P operators would like to do is really shorten these cycle times down to where, they can order equipment and they can show up in 10 or 12 months. Before the last downturn back in 2012, 13, 14, before that downturn, I guess we need to describe which one we're talking about.
Right.
It was pretty common to have to wait 18, 24 months for a tree or for subsea equipment. It was, pretty long lead times. And then when the downturn came in 15, 16, being able to get trees and control systems turned far more quickly really helped crisping up the execution for the E&P operator, which is another way to help drive that cost curve down.
Sure. So, all right, I have a product line question. Subsea trees. Let's start with the big one. Commoditized or not commoditized, and what is the value perceived by the market in this product line?
Well, a lot of research and development have gone into subsea trees, as you know.
Yeah.
But when you ask the question, do you see any difference from one supplier's tree to another supplier's tree? Does anyone offer differentiating technology? It's kind of shocking to see that about 2/3 of the operators and almost 90% of the national oil companies say a tree is a tree is a tree. Now that's very disappointing to all the oil field service companies that have been investing in tree technology. But on the flip side, though, when you ask them, do you want to have fiber in your tree? Just like the fiber optics group I told you about with last week, you are seeing a growing interest in wanting to have a fiber optic feed through and digitize the well from the get-go. So it's interesting that trees are in large view viewed as a commodity, and remember FMC was so successful in terms of selling systems back in 2008, 10, and 12, and those times. They were able to pick up and recognize that. So even though trees are largely viewed as a commodity, about 1/3 to 40% of the operators will view that they're not commoditized and really give some value to the supplier that can differentiate themselves in that area. But regardless if it's a commodity or not, they're expecting the entire supplier industry to upgrade their systems to become more digital.
Right. So they're commoditized, but they want better ones. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, they want everything.
Sure. Of course, that's customers. What's the kind of last couple of years history of how customers are perceiving service providers in terms of performance ratings and how they're doing in the field?
Sure. Well, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have adequate lead times. You can
Right.
see that the Gulf of Mexico operators said in this report that we published 2 weeks ago that on average they're having to wait 18 months for a tree and they'd rather it be 10 months. So obviously there's a disconnect here. Okay.
Sure.
And same thing for the international operators. When we look at the performance ratings of the subsea tree suppliers, you can see that we see quite a bit of variances in ratings. You can see availability gets the lowest ratings, right?
Right.
Equipment quality and reliability gets the highest ratings. The pricing differentials between the various suppliers gets the widest variance in ratings between best performing tree suppliers to the most expensive tree suppliers.
Right.
When we break this up regionally, though, we do see some interesting trends that are forming. In the Gulf of Mexico here on this graph, the industry average performance ratings are in dashed lines, and you can see in large measure the responsiveness ratings going down rather dramatically
Wow.
in the Gulf of Mexico. Technical support kind of trending down, field service execution performance trending down, availability trending down, lead times increasing, pricing competitiveness declining, equipment reliability is getting higher, right?
Right.
When you move international, the international operators overall, relative to the Gulf of Mexico operators, really seem to be a little bit more satisfied. You can see that their performance ratings in the international subsea community were going up for responsiveness, going up for technical support, going up for field service. So clearly, we're seeing some distinction as you segment this market between international subsea versus Gulf of Mexico subsea.
Right. Right. And who's truly excelling on the subsea tree side and who's lagging?
Well, that's an interesting question because if you look at market share in this is a Gulf of Mexico value map where again we have performance on the x-axis, James, and pricing competitiveness on the y-axis.
Sure.
You can see that one subsea and FMC have the majority of the tree market in the Gulf of Mexico, right? So they're obviously getting the majority of the orders, right?
Right.
But you know, Drillquip has come out with a new subsea tree that seems to have a lot of new benefits that they're trying to introduce into the market. And they're certainly positioned as a differentiated value advantage supplier in the Gulf. And so it'd be interesting to kind of track their adoption as the major oil companies begin to evaluate their tree and along with the independents in this region. Baker is trying to re-enter this market after having de-emphasized it during the last downturn of 2015-16, and they've certainly come out with a lot of new technology with their new Aptera designs, and a lot of their trees and control systems and flexibles and connectors have a lot of really strong operational benefits. So, they were just starting to roll all this out when we entered into this downturn. So it's going to be interesting to track, how they're able to kind of reestablish themselves in the Gulf of Mexico. Aker has a small presence here as well. When you move internationally, though, you can see how FMC becomes strongly advantaged versus OneSubsea, and Baker and Aker are both viewed as delivering acceptable values as well, using maybe attractive pricing to offset any perceived performance shortcomings in the voice of the customer here.
Right. So what about if we look at subsea control systems? Who's leading and lagging there?
Yeah, control systems is it's an area of great concern with the E&P operators just due to the frequency of the failures and the obsolescence issues. It's the number one component that becomes obsolete, right? And the good news is the reliability is improving. So you've gone from 72 to 80, 78% of the operators saying that it's meeting their reliability requirements. Control systems, electronics continue to be a failure point. They too, just like trees, are waiting, the delivery times are way too long. So being able to have a tree design or a control system designed to where you can deliver these far more quickly would be beneficial. Quite a bit of variance in the performance ratings. When you go into the Gulf of Mexico, you can see that, again, FMC and Schlumberger tend to be the largest market share providers in the region.
Right.
There's an independent company called ProServe that's done a really good job penetrating the Gulf of Mexico over the last several years. They have deep penetration in the Gulf of Mexico, but their penetration's all with independent operators. None of the major oil companies have used them yet. But
Right.
as you can see here, ProServe continues to distinguish themselves as providing differentiated value with very high ratings from the customers that use them, very high customer loyalty ratings. It's going to be interesting to see if the majors will eventually give them a shot, right?
Right.
Aker Solutions was historically known for having really excellent control systems. If you go back to 2008, 10, and 12, I mean, particularly 8, 9, and 10, there was a lot of subsea operators, James, that they would split it apart. They go to Aker for maybe a control system and FMC for a tree. But Aker's performance and competitive positions kind of declined a little bit in the Gulf of Mexico here as it relates to control systems. Internationally, FMC looks really strong. Aker, again, is trying to get their pricing strategies in alignment with their performance profiles. But, the market tightens up quite a bit here internationally, whereas in the Gulf of Mexico, you see a much wider divergence in performance and value amongst the control system suppliers.
Right, right. What about if we looked at this in subsea umbilicals? Oh, there we are.
Well, for umbilicals, you've got, again, you see a pretty wide variance in performance amongst the major suppliers, but the two that really stand out are Oceaneering and Aker. They really kind of stand out as being, value and performance advantaged. Aker, well, both of these, Aker and Oceaneering, both have facilities here in the U.S. I think Aker's in Mobile and Oceaneering's in Panama City, Florida.
Yep. Right.
I don't know if I have a Gulf of Mexico. I guess I didn't put a Gulf of Mexico one together, but I'd say from an umbilicals perspective, Aker and Oceaneering both really stand out here in this particular market segment.
And then what about ROVs?
Well, that's kind of getting into some of the surveillance work that we do.
Okay.
Which I'll touch on this real quick if you don't mind a little bit, but you can see most all the subsea wells have downhole well performance. It's just only about 15% of this monitoring is fiber optics. So, being able to get that tree with the fiber optic feed through would allow more fiber optic monitoring of the wellbore versus, electronic gauges, right? And then equipment condition, all the subsea equipment that sits on the seafloor, about half of it's being monitored. High degree of confidence in the accuracy of these gauges, so that's good, not a problem there. The use of autonomous underwater vehicles for surveillance and operational tasks in the future, you can see quite a few of the subsea E&P operators are interested in implementing this technology. So when you start to take a look at who's the leader in this space, I guess that big round circle speaks for itself. Oceaneering, and Oceaneering really has done a really good job historically in providing good value and kind of being that premium provider in the space. If we kind of look at Oceaneering a little bit more carefully here, you can see just about every geographic region in which we track them through the voice of the customer, comparing them to their competitors. They're very consistently performing better than the industry averages and really well positioned is delivering differentiated value.
Right.
Their customer loyalty ratings. I like this graph right here because you see this Oceaneering's this whatever color this is. I must be colorblind. What color is that, James?
That's a dark blue, but it's very consistent.
Yeah, see how level and consistent that is. And who's this? Fugro.
Yep.
They popped on the scene recently and made a really good market penetration. But you can see that their customer loyalty rating. So they popped on the market. They were the new kid in town, and then you can kind of see what's happening. They haven't been able to maintain that scalable consistency with their customer loyalty, whereas Oceaneering is pretty tried and true and consistent, very stable.
Right. Okay. Well, David, as you look at this market, the overall subsea market, do you think more consolidation is needed here? And what are some of the possibilities or the areas that make sense?
I think it would make sense. We talked about this last time we spoke on the U.S. land market. Like, do we really need 60 mud motor suppliers, right?
You're right. And we
To
don't.
support, to support the U.S. land market. But and certainly we don't have 60, subsea suppliers that need to be consolidating. But when I look at some differentiated suppliers, I may just, if it's all right, I may go into one of my interactive databases here
Sure.
with you. This is an interactive database, James, that takes into account, subsea equipment repair, ROVs, IWOCs, trees, control systems, umbilicals, manifolds, everything, right? And so when I look at this database and I look at Oceaneering, I look at Drillquip, I look at ProServe, you can see how they clearly differentiate themselves in aggregate versus the FMCs, the Schlumberger OneSubseas, Baker Hughes, and Ockers. If I go into the Gulf of Mexico here for a second, you see this bimodal distribution of value, right?
Wow.
So I'm not an expert like you are in terms of knowing all the balance sheets and whatnot of all these companies and the sizes, but I think Oceaneering and Drillquip have pretty clean balance sheets. ProServe's private held. But you can only imagine the value of consolidating some rooftops and call structures and expanding your revenue base where you have a lot of very complementary capabilities here. So certainly there's a possibility here, just looking at it from a data perspective, right? Of how you could clearly, in the Gulf of Mexico, provide a really compelling consolidated offering here in the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
Imagine if we looked at it internationally here really quick, even international, these three differentiate themselves. I've just aggregated together North Sea, Africa, Asia Pac, all these together.
Sure.
Again, this is all subsea. So,
Sure.
these are some that kind of come to mind. These are a lot of history in Oceaneering and with Drillquip, quite frankly. So those are two good brand names that are out there. ProServe may be a company that's a little bit less known, but certainly beginning to establish itself in the areas in which it participates.
Right. Right. Dave, do you have any examples of Drillquip, Oceaneering, ProServe using interactive software?
Sure. If I come in here and, what we come and do here? We can look at it by product line here. If you look at Oceaneering just really quick, if you look at Oceaneering with IWOCs and subsea equipment repair and ROVs and umbilicals, you can see they're almost always in the value advantage quadrant. I don't know what filter I have turned on. I'm looking at this internationally. Let's do Gulf of Mexico, see what happens. Again, very, very solid in these areas. If you look at Drillquip, you got subsea wellheads, trees, repair and maintenance, and ProServe's just going to be control systems for the most part. So, they're very complementary to one another. Clearly, if you came in here and did any type of head-to-head in the Gulf of Mexico of Oceaneering versus FMC, or if you came in here and you took if you came in here and grabbed an Oceaneering, there's a lot of suppliers. So maybe there are some suppliers that need to be consolidated here, James. versus OneSubsea, you can start to see how they have such a tremendous advantage there, right? I was looking for Technique FMC. You must be scrolling down here.
There you go.
And so you can start to see, no matter where you start to look at this, interactively, you'll see areas where Technique may have some strengths and where Oceaneering has some strengths.
Right.
So we can segment that out, but generally, to answer your question, I do think consolidation does make sense in the subsea arena. It's just not as many opportunities for it as we see on land.
Right. Sure. Well, David, last question for me. I know we're bumping up against the 45 minutes I said I needed you for. This is the hardest question to answer, so that's why I saved it for last. But when do you believe the subsea market's going to return to some sense of normalcy, and how should we think about cycle times, peaks, troughs, as it is different from the onshore market?
Well, I think that the subsea suppliers that are able to provide, clearly differentiated delivery times and responsiveness are really going to be benefited here, because you see how volatile the markets can be, right? And how you have to be able to quickly respond to upturns in the market and downturns in the market. But, historically, the deep water market, as you know, has been kind of long-term focused. And so when you look at the 5-year forward curve on oil, and if you can see some stability getting into the 40s, into the 50s, to where, those are the price points that we talked about earlier that these deep water operators really need. They're a little bit less interested in what the oil price is going to do this month or next month or this quarter versus next quarter. They're really looking for, over that investment horizon, to get their return on their investment over the next 5 or 10 years, that there's going to be a fairly stable market. And so I always look at the forward curve when I look at the deep water. I thought it was quite interesting in the last downturn. That's subsea wellheads, but again, that's drill clips area. But if I looked at the last downturn here on this graph here, I recall in the last downturn, James, when we were coming out of the 15-16 downturn and U.S. land was picking up rigs, but the offshore community was still pretty silent, right?
Right.
And even though sentiment broke above this critical 50 barrier, they wanted to see stability in that forward curve before they would go into their room and their budgeting rooms and begin to budget for the following year. And it really wasn't until 2018 was really probably one of the first years in which you saw some really commitments on the budget line, and most of those commitments really didn't come to fruition to 2019, when projects were sanctioned and orders were being placed with FMC and OneSubsea, and the backlogs began to fill. The messaging out to the NPR operators saying your 10, 12-month trees now 18, 24 months, welcome back, and so I'll look to that forward curve, and usually the deep water operators like to see about 12 months of stability in markets with a forward horizon on the forward curve that says, look, you're going to go make an investment. It's going to maybe take you 12 or 24 months to implement, and that you're going to have a business and economic climate to where you're going to get a sufficient return. So I'm always looking at that forward curve, and I'm looking for some stability to where we're not constantly gyrating between negative $38 on a NYMEX contract up to $36, right? I mean, that's just a lot of volatility and uncertainty. It's hard to make a long-term decision when you're surrounded by all that chaos.
Absolutely. So your crystal ball says 22, 23?
Well, I would think that we're sometime in 21, if the markets remain stable, that hopefully starting in 22, you'll start to see some recommitment from the deepwater operators for new projects in 2022.
Right. But that's kind of our thinking as well, is that 22 is going to be much, kind of a return to what we were just getting into in 19. Well, David, I really appreciate you joining us today. As always, I learned a ton, and I believe our audience did as well. So thanks so much for sharing your insights and the proprietary work that you guys do. Look forward to having you on again on another topic sometime soon.
Well, thanks, James. It's good to be with you today. You have a good one.
Thanks. You too, David.
Thanks. Bye-bye.